A woman accused of theft travels 300 miles west to escape her past, only to have it follow her with fabricated evidence and false witnesses. But when a former Pinkerton detective recognizes her accuser as a dangerous criminal he's been hunting for years, the hunter becomes the hunted. This is a story about courage in the face of corruption, love blooming from shared pain, and the power of truth to overcome even the most carefully constructed lies. If this story of redemption and justice moves you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of triumph over adversity. Now let's journey to Copper Creek, Montana, where sometimes saving a life can change everything. You saved my brother's life. Seamstress rescued boy from runaway horse. Then sheriff called her a criminal. The runaway horse thundered down Copper Creek's main street like a bullet from hell, foam streaming from its mouth, eyes white with terror. 10-year-old Tommy Whitmore clung to the saddle horn, his small body bouncing dangerously with each jarring stride. People scattered, shouting warnings, but no one moved to help. The horse was too wild, too fast, too dangerous. Except for one woman. Cassandra Morgan dropped her traveling bag and ran directly into the horse's path. She spread her arms wide, her gray traveling dress whipping in the wind, and began speaking in low, soothing tones that somehow cut through the chaos. "Easy now, beautiful. Easy." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice. Its stride faltered. "That's it. You're scared, aren't you? Something spooked you, but you're safe now." 20 feet, 15, 10. The horse slowed to a trot, then stopped just feet from Cassandra's sides, heaving. She reached out slowly and caught the bridle, her hands steady despite her racing heart. "There we go. Good boy." Tommy slid from the saddle and ran to a young woman who'd pushed through the crowd. "Grace. Grace, the lady saved me." The woman, perhaps 18, with worried brown eyes, caught the boy in a fierce embrace before turning to Cassandra. "I don't know how to thank you. He's my little brother, and if anything had happened—" "He's safe," Cassandra said, simply checking the horse for injuries. "That's what matters." A crowd had gathered, their faces filled with amazement and gratitude. For a moment, Cassandra allowed herself to hope. This could be the fresh start she'd traveled 300 miles to find. These people saw her as a hero, not a scandal. Then Sheriff Marcus Steele's voice shattered her fragile hope. "Step away from that boy, Miss Morgan." The crowd parted as Steele approached, his silver star glinting in the afternoon sun. He was a man in his 50s with calculating eyes and the kind of smile that never reached them. Cassandra's blood turned to ice. "Sheriff, received a telegram about you 3 days ago from Denver. Warned us all about what kind of woman you really are." The gratitude on the faces around her began to shift to confusion, then suspicion. Tommy pressed closer to his sister, sensing the change in mood. "I don't understand," Grace said, her arm still around her brother. "This woman just saved Tommy's life." "This woman," Steele announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "is a thief and a liar run out of Denver for crimes she won't confess. Name's Cassandra Morgan, and she's here thinking she can hide among decent folk." The words hit Cassandra like physical blows. She'd traveled so far, changed her name, started over completely. How had her past found her here? "That's not true," she managed, her voice shaking. "I never stole anything. I came here to what, continue your criminal ways in a new town." Steele stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun. "The telegram came from Sheriff Porter himself. Says you seduced a respectable businessman, then robbed him when he wouldn't marry you. Says you fled before they could arrest you proper." Cassandra felt the familiar nightmare beginning again. "Harrison Blackwood is a liar. I never." Harrison Blackwood. A new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see a man riding toward them on a black horse. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark shirt and worn leather vest. Even from a distance, there was something about him that commanded attention. As he drew closer, Cassandra could see his face, perhaps 35, weathered by sun and wind, with gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing. There was something familiar about those eyes, though she was certain they'd never met. The rider dismounted with fluid grace, his gaze fixed on Cassandra with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Did you say Harrison Blackwood?" He repeated, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly in the sudden silence. Sheriff Steele's jaw tightened. "That's right, Crawford. The businessman she robbed in Denver. What's it to you, Nathan Crawford? Cassandra had heard the name whispered since arriving in Copper Creek an hour ago. The man who kept to himself, who had a reputation for being dangerous when crossed. Nathan's eyes never left Cassandra's face. Interesting, because Harrison Blackwood is a name I know very well. Something in his tone made Steele shift uncomfortably. Meaning what? Meaning Harrison Blackwood is a criminal who's been operating between Denver and San Francisco for the better part of 5 years. Trafficking, extortion, and yes, framing innocent women when they refuse his advances. The crowd murmured, confusion rippling through their ranks. That's a serious accusation, Steele said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. It's a serious crime. Nathan finally looked away from Cassandra to fix Steele with a stare that made the sheriff take a step back. Tell me, Sheriff, did this telegram include any actual evidence, witness statements, documentation, or just the word of a man 300 miles away? Steele's face reddened. Sheriff Porter is a respected lawman. Sheriff Porter is in Blackwood's pocket, Nathan interrupted. Has been for 2 years. I know, because I spent 18 months trying to build a case against both of them. Cassandra stared at him. You're a lawman. Was. Nathan's expression was unreadable. Pinkerton detective, retired last year when I got tired of watching criminals buy their way out of justice. The revelation sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Grace Whitmore stepped forward, Tommy still clinging to her skirt. Mr. Crawford, this lady saved my brother's life, risked her own to do it. Does that sound like something a criminal would do? Nathan looked at the boy, then back at Cassandra. No, Miss Whitmore, it doesn't. Sheriff Steele's face was purple now. This is all very convenient, Crawford. You show up just in time to defend a woman you have never met. I defend the truth, Nathan said quietly. And the truth is that if Harrison Blackwood sent a telegram about this woman, it's because she's innocent and he wants her silenced before she can expose him. For a moment, the street was silent, except for the whisper of wind through the wooden buildings. Then an older woman pushed through the crowd. She was perhaps 60 with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that commanded respect. Cassandra had noticed her earlier standing outside a neat house with lace curtains. Mrs. Delacroix, Sheriff Steele said nervously, this doesn't concern a young woman being falsely accused in my town concerns me greatly. Rosa Delacroix said in accented English that spoke of New Orleans breeding. She studied Cassandra with sharp blue eyes. Child, what is your trade? I'm a seamstress, Cassandra replied, grateful for a question she could answer honestly. I came here hoping to open a dress shop. Mrs. Delacroix nodded slowly. These hands, she gestured to Cassandra's calloused fingertips, they speak of honest work. And this man Crawford speaks of criminal accusations being false. She fixed Steele with a look that made him squirm. Perhaps we should wait for actual evidence before condemning someone who just saved a child's life. Pastor Hendricks approached from the direction of the white steepled church. Mrs. Delacroix is right. Miss Morgan, whatever your past may or may not include today, you acted with courage and compassion. That speaks to character. The crowd was shifting, Cassandra realized. The initial condemnation was giving way to uncertainty, questions, doubt about the sheriff's accusations. But Steele wasn't finished. Fine words, he said harshly, but they don't change facts. This woman is wanted for questioning in Denver, and until we know the truth, she's not welcome in Copper Creek. She's welcome in my home, Mrs. Delacroix said firmly. Until the truth is established, Miss Morgan will be my guest. Nathan stepped forward, positioning himself between Cassandra and the sheriff. And she'll have my protection while these accusations are investigated properly, with evidence, witnesses, and due process instead of trial by telegram. For a moment, Cassandra thought Sheriff Steele might draw his gun. His hand moved toward it, and the crowd tensed. Then Nathan's hand moved to his own weapon with casual ease, and something in his gray eyes made Steele think better of escalation. This isn't over, Steele said finally. Telegram or no telegram, I'm watching you, Miss Morgan. One step out of line, and you're gone. He stalked away, leaving an uncomfortable silence in his wake. The crowd began to disperse, though many lingered to steal curious glances at Cassandra. Grace Whitmore approached with Tommy still in tow. Miss Morgan, I meant what I said. You saved my brother's life today. Whatever anyone says about your past, I won't forget what you did. Tommy nodded solemnly. Thank you for stopping the horse, miss. I was really scared. Cassandra knelt to his level. You were very brave, Tommy. Sometimes being scared and being brave happen at the same time. After Grace led her brother away, Cassandra found herself alone with Nathan Crawford and Mrs. Delacroix. The older woman studied her with those sharp blue eyes. Come, child. Let's get you settled. You look ready to collapse. Cassandra realized she was shaking. The confrontation, the public humiliation, the fear, it was all catching up with her. Mrs. Delacroix, I can't impose. You don't even know me. I know enough. The woman's voice was gentle but firm. I know you risked your life for a child. I know you're being hunted by a man who sounds very much like the devil who destroyed my own life 10 years ago. Something in her tone made both Cassandra and Nathan look at her sharply. What do you mean? Nathan asked. Mrs. Delacroix was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. I had a daughter once, Marie. Beautiful, talented, only 17. She was taken from me in New Orleans by a man who dealt in flesh. Rich, powerful, protected by corrupt lawmen. I never found her, never learned her fate. Her voice grew stronger, more determined. But I learned to recognize the type. And when I see another young woman being hunted by such a man, I will not stand by silent. Nathan's expression had gone very still. This man in New Orleans, do you remember his name? I'll never forget it, Harrison Blackwood. The words fell into the afternoon air like stones into still water. Cassandra felt the world tilt around her. The same man, Nathan said quietly. The same predator operating in different cities. His gray eyes fixed on Cassandra. Which means you're not his first victim, and you won't be his last unless we stop him. Mrs. Delacroix reached out and took Cassandra's hand. Come, child. We have much to discuss. As they walked toward the neat house with lace curtains, Cassandra felt something she hadn't experienced in months' hope. Not just for her own survival, but for something more. Justice, perhaps. Or even the family she'd never thought she'd find. Behind them, Nathan Crawford stood in the street watching them go. His hand absently touched the scar on his left temple, a souvenir from his last encounter with Harrison Blackwood's men. He'd failed to bring Blackwood to justice then, but perhaps fate was offering him another chance. Whatever came next, he would not let Cassandra Morgan face it alone. The sun was setting over Copperer Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson as the three unlikely allies prepared for the battle to come. The interior of Mrs. Delacroix's house was like stepping into a different world. Rich fabrics draped the windows, oil paintings lined the walls, and the scent of lavender and something distinctly French hung in the air. It was the home of someone who had once known elegance, who refused to let hardship steal beauty from her life. Mrs. Delacroix settled Cassandra at a small table, while Nathan stood near the window, his eyes scanning the street for potential trouble. Now then, Mrs. Delacroix said as she prepared tea, let us speak honestly, all of us. She set cups before her guests and sat down, her blue eyes moving between them. Miss Morgan, I suspect Harrison Blackwood's interest in you was not merely professional. Cassandra's hands trembled as she lifted her cup. I worked for a dressmaker in Denver. Mrs. Blackwood was one of our most important clients. Through her, I met her husband. She paused, gathering courage. He made advances. When I refused, he became angry, told me I would regret humiliating him. And then, Nathan's voice was gentle but intent. A week later, Mrs. Blackwood's diamond bracelet went missing. It was found in my workroom, hidden beneath fabric scraps. I was arrested but released pending trial. My employer fired me, and I realized I could never win against Blackwood's money and influence. So I ran. Mrs. Delacroix reached across and squeezed her hand. You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that. Nathan turned from the window. The bracelet was planted, obviously. Blackwood's standard method. He's done it before at least 3 times that I know of. You really were a Pinkerton detective, Cassandra asked. Nathan nodded, his expression growing distant. For 8 years. Started tracking Blackwood 2 years ago when a young woman in San Francisco hired the agency. Her sister had been taken by traffickers, and all the evidence pointed to Blackwood's organization. What happened? We got close. Too close. Blackwood's men ambushed me outside Denver. Nathan touched the scar on his temple. Killed my partner, left me for dead. By the time I recovered, Blackwood had disappeared, and the case went cold. Mrs. Delacroix was watching him with new understanding. That's why you left the Pinkertons. That's why I bought a ranch and tried to forget. Nathan's jaw tightened. But some men you can't forget. Some debts demand payment. And now he's here, Cassandra said quietly, following me. No, Nathan corrected. Now we know where he is. That changes everything. A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Delacroix rose to answer it, returning with Pastor Hendricks, who looked troubled. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, he said. But there's something you should know. I've just spoken with several townspeople, and it seems Sheriff Steele received more than just a telegram about Miss Morgan. What do you mean, Nathan asked. A substantial donation to the town's development fund. Anonymous, but it arrived the same day as the telegram. Enough money to build a new schoolhouse and repair the church roof. The implications settled over them like a dark cloud. Nathan's expression turned hard as stone. Blackwood's buying the sheriff's cooperation, he said, making sure Cassandra won't find allies here. There's more, Pastor Hendricks continued reluctantly. Steele's been asking questions about you too, Mr. Crawford. About your ranch, your finances, whether you might be interested in selling. Nathan and Cassandra exchanged glances. He's not just after me, she realized. He wants your land too. Makes sense, Nathan said grimly. The railroad's coming through this area eventually. Copper Creek sits at the perfect spot for a junction. Control this town, and you control the future rail traffic. Mrs. Delacroix set down her teacup with a decisive clink. Then we must stop him. All of us. Mrs. Delacroix, Pastor Hendricks said gently, this is dangerous business. Perhaps it would be better to contact the federal marshals. The marshals who didn't stop him in New Orleans or San Francisco or Denver. Her voice carried old pain but new determination. No, Pastor, some evils must be faced directly. Over the next 3 days, they prepared for Blackwood's inevitable arrival. Nathan taught Cassandra to shoot their hands touching as he adjusted her grip on the revolver. The contact sent unexpected warmth through both of them, though neither acknowledged it aloud. You're a natural, he said after she hit 3 targets in a row. Steady hands, good eye. Comes from sewing, I suppose. You have to be precise. They were practicing behind Mrs. Delacroix's house as the sun set, the sound of gunfire echoing off the surrounding hills. In the fading light, Cassandra looked younger, more vulnerable than her 26 years. Nathan, she said quietly, what if we can't stop him? What if his money and connections are too strong? Nathan lowered his own weapon. Then we'll have tried. Sometimes that's all we can do, to try and hope it's enough. Is that what you told yourself? When your partner died, oh, the question hung between them like smoke. Nathan was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. When my partner died, I told myself I was a failure, that I'd let down everyone who trusted me. It took me a year to realize that believing that was just another way of letting Blackwood win. Cassandra studied his profile in the twilight. What made you change your mind? Mrs. Chen, Mrs. Delacroix, when I first came to Copper Creek, I was broken. Drinking too much, sleeping too little, jumping at shadows. She took one look at me and said, that man needs purpose more than he needs pity. And she was right. Purpose doesn't erase the past, but it gives you a reason to face the future. He turned to look at her directly. You gave me that purpose, Cassandra. Fighting for you, protecting you, it reminds me why I became a detective in the first place. Before Cassandra could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Nathan immediately stepped protectively in front of her, his hand moving to his gun. But it was Grace Whitmore who appeared riding bareback on a farm horse, her face flushed with urgency. Mr. Crawford, Miss Morgan, she called, sliding down from the horse. They're coming, a whole group of them riding hard from the east. Sheriff Steele sent me to warn you. He said to tell you Harrison Blackwood will be here within the hour. Cassandra felt ice flood her veins. She'd known this moment would come, but the reality of it still struck her like a physical blow. Nathan's expression had gone cold and focused. How many men? 5 or 6 looked like, all armed. Grace caught her breath. Sheriff Steele seemed nervous, more nervous than I've ever seen him. Good, Nathan said grimly. He should be nervous. When you make deals with devil, you never know when they'll come to collect. Mrs. Delacroix appeared from the house, drawn by the sound of voices. When Grace repeated her warning, the older woman's face set in determined lines. Then we face him together, she said simply. Mrs. Delacroix, Nathan began. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you told me his name." Her blue eyes flashed. "Harrison Blackwood took my daughter from me 10 years ago. If God has brought him within my reach, then perhaps it's time for justice." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching horses echoed from the main street. Nathan checked his weapons while Cassandra steadied her breathing the way he'd taught her. "Remember," he said quietly, "whatever happens, we know the truth. That has to be enough." They walked together toward the front of the house where they could see the main street. A group of riders had indeed arrived, 5 men in expensive clothes with the hard faces of hired guns. And at their head, unmistakable, even after all these months, was Harrison Blackwood. He sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, his dark hair silver-touched at the temples, his handsome face wearing the expression of a man accustomed to getting his way. When his eyes found Cassandra standing defiantly in front of Mrs. Delacroix's house, his smile was cold and triumphant. "Cassandra Morgan," he called, his cultured voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "Or should I say Cassandra Hayes? You've led me quite a chase, my dear." Harrison Blackwood." Nathan stepped forward, positioning himself between Blackwood and the women. "Should have known you'd turn up eventually, like a bad penny." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he recognized Nathan. For just a moment, his composed facade cracked, revealing something dangerous underneath. "Nathan Crawford, I thought you were dead." "Sorry to disappoint you." "Oh, you haven't disappointed me. In fact, your presence here makes this even more satisfying." Blackwood's smile returned cold and predatory. "Two birds with one stone, as they say." Sheriff Steele appeared hurrying down the street with obvious reluctance. His face was flushed, and he kept glancing nervously between Blackwood and Nathan. "Mr. Blackwood," Steele said, slightly out of breath, "I wasn't expecting you quite so soon." "I decided not to waste time, Sheriff. Miss Morgan has already caused me considerable trouble and expense. I want this matter resolved quickly." "Of course, sir. I'll arrest her immediately and—" Actually, Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "There's been a development. It seems Miss Morgan has an accomplice in her criminal activities." His gaze fixed on Nathan. "Mr. Crawford here has been harboring a fugitive and interfering with justice. I think they should both be arrested." The street had filled with townspeople drawn by the commotion. Cassandra could see Grace and Tommy Whitmore watching from near the general store, Pastor Hendricks standing with several church members, and dozens of others who'd heard about the confrontation. "Now wait just a minute," Pastor Hendricks stepped forward. "Mr. Crawford hasn't done anything but stand up for an innocent woman, and Miss Morgan hasn't been proven guilty of anything." "Haven't I?" Blackwood reached into his coat and pulled out an official-looking document. "I have here a warrant for Miss Morgan's arrest, signed by a federal judge in Denver. She's wanted for grand theft and conspiracy to defraud." The crowd murmured, and Cassandra felt her heart sink. Of course, Blackwood would have official papers, he always did. But Nathan was studying the warrant with the trained eye of a former detective. "Federal warrant for a local theft, that's unusual. Mind if I examine it?" "I mind very much," Blackwood said sharply. "You're not a lawman anymore, Crawford. You're just a failed detective who couldn't protect his partner." The words hit their target. Nathan's face went white, then red with anger. For a moment, Cassandra thought he might do something reckless. Instead, he smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that made several of Blackwood's men shift uncomfortably in their saddles. "You're right," Nathan said quietly. "I couldn't protect my partner. But I learned something from that failure, Blackwood. I learned that men like you always make one crucial mistake." "And what's that?" "You underestimate the people you hurt." Nathan's voice carried clearly to every corner of the gathered crowd. "You think because you have money and influence, because you can buy sheriffs and forge warrants, that you're untouchable. But you're not. You're just a predator who preys on the innocent, and eventually predators get hunted." Blackwood's composure cracked a little more. "Careful, Crawford. You're making accusations you can't prove." "And am I—" Nathan pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Because I took the liberty of sending some telegrams while you were riding here from wherever you've been hiding. Want to know what I learned?" The street fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through the buildings. "Judge Williams, the one who supposedly signed your warrant, he's been dead for 3 months. Heart attack in his chambers." Nathan's voice grew stronger with each word. "Sheriff Porter, who sent the original telegram about Cassandra, He was found murdered in his office last week, shot by unknown assailants. Gasps wide rippled through the crowd. Even Sheriff Steele looked shocked. Furthermore, Nathan continued relentlessly, the Denver authorities have no record of any theft charges against Cassandra Morgan, or Cassandra Hayes, or any variation thereof. Blackwood's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. Lies. Desperate lies from a desperate man. Then you won't mind if we wire Denver directly to verify the charges, Nathan suggested. Right now, in front of everyone. For the first time since arriving, Blackwood looked uncertain. His eyes darted around the crowd, noting the growing suspicion on their faces the way even Sheriff Steele was starting to look doubtful. There's no need for dramatics, Blackwood said, attempting to regain control. The charges against Miss Morgan are legitimate regardless of clerical errors in the paperwork. What about the charges against you? Mrs. Delacroix stepped forward, her voice ringing with unexpected authority. What about the charge of kidnapping my daughter? The words fell into the evening air like a thunderclap. Everyone turned to stare at the elegant, older woman who had just accused one of the wealthiest men in the territory of kidnapping. Blackwood's face went completely white. I don't know what you're talking about. Marie Delacroix, 17 years old, taken from her boarding house in New Orleans 10 years ago. You remember her? Don't you, Mr. Blackwood? Blonde hair, blue eyes, a beautiful singing voice. Mrs. Delacroix's voice grew stronger, more certain with each word. I spent years looking for her, years following rumors and false leads. But I never forgot the man who destroyed my life. Harrison Blackwood, they called him. Rich, powerful, protected by corrupt officials. She stepped closer to his horse, her blue eyes blazing. Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, where is my daughter? The crowd was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far larger than a simple theft accusation. Blackwood's men looked increasingly nervous, their hands moving toward their weapons. But it was Blackwood himself who provided the final revelation. Your daughter, he said with vicious satisfaction, was a profitable investment. Beautiful girls always are, especially when they're trained properly. The admission hung in the air for a heartbeat before the crowd exploded in angry shouts. Pastor Hendricks grabbed Sheriff Steele's arm, while several other men moved to surround Blackwood's party. Nathan drew his gun with lightning speed. Harrison Blackwood, you're under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, and murder. You have no authority here, Crawford, Blackwood snarled, but his earlier confidence had evaporated completely. I have the authority of every decent person in this town, Nathan replied. Sheriff Steele, are you going to do your job, or do we need to handle this ourselves? Steele looked around at the angry faces surrounding him, at the crowd that had heard everything. His political calculation was swift and decisive. Harrison Blackwood, he said loudly, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and accessory to murder. Men disarm his companions. Blackwood's hired guns found themselves outnumbered 10-1 by angry townspeople. They surrendered without firing a shot, though Blackwood himself seemed incapable of accepting defeat. This is impossible, he said as Nathan personally removed his weapons. I own half the judges in Colorado Territory. I have connections, influence. You had connections, Nathan corrected. But when your crimes become public knowledge, those connections have a way of disappearing. Politicians don't like being associated with child traffickers. As Blackwood was led away in chains, Cassandra found herself surrounded by townspeople offering apologies, support, and gratitude. Grace Whitmore hugged her tightly, while Tommy shyly thanked her again for saving him. But it was Mrs. Delacroix who drew her aside, tears streaming down the older woman's dignified face. My dear, she said softly, I may never know what became of my Marie, but tonight I prevented him from taking another daughter from another mother. That has to be enough. Cassandra embraced her, feeling the weight of shared grief and shared triumph. It's more than enough. It's justice. As the excitement died down and people began returning to their homes, Nathan approached them. His face was weary but satisfied. It's over, he said simply. Really over this time. What will happen to him? Cassandra asked. Federal marshals will be here tomorrow. He'll face trial in Denver for murder, then likely extradition to New Orleans for the kidnapping charges. Either way, he'll never hurt another woman. Cassandra felt something inside her chest, a tension she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be without it, finally released. I can stay, she said wonderingly. I can actually stay and build a life here. We both can, Nathan said, and something in his voice made her look at him sharply. Nathan's gray eyes held hers. If you want to, if you'll have a former detective who's better with horses than people who has nightmares about the partner he couldn't save, who's probably too old for you and definitely too set in his ways. Mrs. Delacroix chuckled softly. I think I'll go check on my tea, she said diplomatically, heading toward the house. Alone in the evening light, Cassandra and Nathan faced each other. The adrenaline of confrontation was fading, leaving something deeper, more permanent in its wake. Nathan, Cassandra said softly, you saved my life today. You saved my future. You saved mine first, he replied. The day you arrived in Copper Creek and reminded me what's worth fighting for. She stepped closer, close enough to see the silver threading through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of hard experience and harder wisdom. What happens now, she asked. Now, Nathan said, reaching out to touch her face gently. Now we find out what a life built on truth instead of lies looks like. As he leaned down to kiss her, Cassandra thought she heard the sound of applause from Mrs. Delacroix's window. But she was too busy kissing him back to be sure. The federal marshals arrived the next morning, just as Nathan had predicted. They took Harrison Blackwood and his men into custody with the grim efficiency of lawmen who'd been hunting the same criminals for years. Marshal James Whitman, a weathered man with sharp eyes and silver hair, spoke privately with Nathan, Cassandra, and Mrs. Delacroix in the latter's parlor. You've done the territory a great service, he said, reviewing Nathan's collected evidence. Blackwood's organization has been operating for at least 7 years that we know of. Dozens of women have disappeared, probably more. Mrs. Delacroix sat very straight, her hands folded in her lap. Marshal, will there be any way to trace what happened to the victims to find those who might still be alive? Whitman's expression gentled. We'll try, ma'am. Blackwood's books and correspondence might give us leads. But after this much time, I understand. Her voice was steady, though her eyes held old pain. At least no more mothers will lose their daughters to that man. Thanks to your courage in speaking up, all of your courage. The marshal nodded to each of them. There'll be trials, of course. We'll need your testimonies. We'll be there, Nathan said firmly. After the marshals left with their prisoners, Copper Creek settled into a strange kind of normalcy. The excitement of the confrontation gave way to the everyday business of life, though Cassandra found herself the subject of considerably more attention than she was comfortable with. It's like being a curiosity in a museum, she confided to Nathan 3 days later, as they walked through the town. Every person they passed nodded respectfully, many stopping to speak with her about dress alterations or simply to express their gratitude for her role in exposing Blackwood. Better than being a scandal, Nathan pointed out. Though I understand the feeling. After I killed Dutch Morrison, I couldn't buy a drink without someone wanting to hear the story. They paused in front of the empty building that had once housed the town's millinery shop. Pastor Hendricks had offered it to Cassandra at an extremely reasonable rent, and she was considering whether it would suit her needs. It has good light, she mused, looking through the dusty windows, and the back room would work well for storage and fitting. Room for expansion, too, if the business grows. Cassandra looked at him curiously. You seem awfully invested in my dress shop for a rancher. Nathan was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes serious. Cassandra, there is something I need to tell you about my intentions. Her heart began to beat faster. Your intentions. I know we've only known each other a week. I know you've been through hell and probably need time to heal. But I also know that what I feel for you isn't going to change with time. He turned to face her, fully ignoring the curious glances of passers-by. I'm in love with you. Have been since the moment I saw you risk your life for a child you'd never met. And I want to know if there's any chance you might feel the same. Cassandra felt her breath catch. Part of her wanted to be practical, to point out all the reasons why this was too fast, too soon, too complicated. But a larger part of her recognized the truth when she heard it. Nathan, she said softly, I've spent so many months being afraid. Afraid of Harrison, afraid of being discovered, afraid of trusting anyone. But when I'm with you, I'm not afraid anymore. Is that a yes? That's a yes to love, she said, stepping closer, and a yes to whatever comes next. Nathan kissed her then right there on Main Street in front of God and everybody. When they broke apart, Cassandra saw Mrs. Delacroix watching from her front porch, beaming with approval. That woman, Nathan said, following her gaze, has been planning this since the day you arrived. Smart woman. the smartest. She's also offered to help you set up the shop. Apparently, she has some experience with business matters. Cassandra laughed. I'm beginning to suspect Mrs. Delacroix has experience with a great many things she hasn't mentioned. That evening, the three of them sat in Mrs. Delacroix's parlor, planning Cassandra's new business. The older woman had indeed proven to have extensive knowledge of commerce, inventory management, and customer relations. In New Orleans, she explained when Cassandra commented on her expertise, I owned 3 dress shops before Marie was taken. I was quite successful, actually. What made you come to Copper Creek? Nathan asked. Mrs. Delacroix was quiet for a moment. After Marie disappeared, I couldn't bear to stay. Too many memories. I sold everything and traveled west, thinking distance might ease the pain. When I reached Copper Creek, I was simply too tired to go any further. And now, Cassandra asked gently, now I think perhaps I was meant to stop here. To be in the right place when you needed help. To face Harrison Blackwood one final time. She smiled and it transformed her face. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. Over the following weeks, Cassandra threw herself into establishing her shop. Mrs. Delacroix proved invaluable not only for her business acumen, but for her connections with suppliers and her ability to convince the ladies of Copper Creek that they desperately needed new wardrobes. Nathan helped with the physical work, repairing shelves, hanging signs, moving furniture. But more than that, he provided steady encouragement and an ear hammer to listen when she worried about everything from fabric costs to whether the women of a small Montana town would truly need a full-time seamstress. You're forgetting something important, he told her one evening as they walked back from the shop. You're not just offering alterations and repairs. You're offering style quality and the chance for women to feel beautiful. That's always going to be in demand. You have a lot of faith in me, Tish. I have a lot of faith in us. The shop opened on a crisp October morning, and to Cassandra's amazement, she had 3 customers before noon. Grace Whitmore was first bringing a dress that needed taking in after she'd lost weight during the excitement of recent events. Mary Preston, the banker's wife, wanted a new winter coat made from fabric she'd been saving for years. And Sarah Murphy needed her wedding dress altered. She was marrying the blacksmith in November. By closing time, Cassandra had taken 6 orders and fielded inquiries about everything from children's clothing to men's formal wear. I think you're going to be busy, Nathan observed, reviewing her appointment book. Wonderfully busy. Cassandra agreed, then paused as she noticed something. Nathan, look at this. She was holding a small envelope that had been slipped under the shop door. Her name was written on it in an unfamiliar hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief note. Miss Morgan, thank you for bringing justice to our town. My daughter Sally needs a dress for her first dance. Would you have time to help John Wheaton? The mayor, Nathan said, recognizing the signature. Official town approval, it looks like. Cassandra felt tears prick her eyes. 6 months ago, she'd been a fugitive, accused of theft, friendless and homeless. Now she was a respected businesswoman in a community that valued her contribution. It doesn't seem real, she whispered. It's real. Nathan assured her. You made it real by refusing to give up, by fighting for the truth, by being brave when bravery was the last thing you felt. That weekend, Nathan took her to his ranch for the first time. Cassandra was struck by the beauty of the place, the log house nestled in a valley, the well-tended fields, the horses grazing in the evening light. You built this? She asked as they stood on the front porch. Most of it. Bought the land 3 years ago and added buildings as I could afford them. He looked out over his domain with quiet satisfaction. Always thought I'd share it with someone eventually. Nathan, Cassandra began, then stopped suddenly, uncertain. What is it? Are you asking me to marry you? Nathan turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. I'm asking if you'd want me to ask, someday, when you're ready. Cassandra considered this. Marriage had always seemed like something that happened to other women. Women who hadn't been accused of theft, who hadn't spent months running from false charges, who hadn't seen the ugliness that men like Harrison Blackwood could inflict. But standing there in the golden light of a Montana sunset with Nathan beside her and his dream of a home spread before them, she could imagine a different kind of life. A life built on honesty instead of deception, on love instead of fear. Yes, she said simply, someday soon I'd want you to ask. Nathan's smile was like sunrise. Good to know. They were married the following spring in Pastor Hendrick's church with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Cassandra wore a dress she'd made herself, ivory silk with intricate beadwork that had taken months to complete. Mrs. Delacroix gave her away, and Grace Whitmore served as maid of honor. Sheriff Steele, who had redeemed himself considerably by testifying against Blackwood at the trial, provided security. The federal marshals had been concerned about potential retaliation from Blackwood's remaining associates, but the ceremony proceeded without incident. At the reception held in the community hall, Cassandra found herself surrounded by friends she never would have imagined having. The ladies who'd been suspicious of her just months before now competed to compliment her dress and offer advice about married life. "You've become the town's success story," Pastor Hendricks observed, watching the celebration. "The woman who came here accused of theft and ended up bringing a major criminal to justice. It's quite a transformation." "I didn't transform," Cassandra replied, watching Nathan dance with Mrs. Delacroix. "I just finally got the chance to show who I really was." The trials began that summer. Cassandra, Nathan, and Mrs. Delacroix traveled to Denver to testify against Harrison Blackwood, who faced charges of murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. The evidence was overwhelming, compiled not just from their testimonies, but from books and records seized from Blackwood's various enterprises. During the trial, they learned the full scope of his criminal activities. At least 47 women had disappeared over 7 years. Some had been sold into prostitution in San Francisco and Seattle. Others had been shipped south to Mexico or even overseas. Most heartbreaking of all, they learned the fate of Marie Delacroix. She died trying to escape, Marshal Whitman told Mrs. Delacroix privately, 3 years after she was taken. One of Blackwood's associates testified that she never stopped fighting, never stopped trying to get home to you. Mrs. Delacroix wept then for the first time since Cassandra had known her, but they were tears of relief as much as grief. "She didn't break," she said when she could speak again. "They couldn't break her spirit. That's all I needed to know." Harrison Blackwood was convicted on all charges and sentenced to hang. His criminal organization was dismantled, his assets seized and used to compensate victims where possible. Justice incomplete, but real, had been served. When they returned to Copper Creek, life settled into the rhythm that would define their years together. Cassandra's shop thrived, eventually requiring her to hire 2 assistants. Nathan's ranch prospered as well, and he became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory. Mrs. Delacroix became the grandmother Cassandra had never had, the keeper of family stories and the dispenser of unsolicited but usually accurate advice. When Cassandra gave birth to their first child, a daughter, they named Marie. Mrs. Delacroix was the first to hold her. "She's beautiful," the older woman said, tears streaming down her face. "My Marie would have loved her." "She'll know about your Marie," Cassandra promised. "She'll know about the brave woman who never gave up hope, who never stopped fighting for justice." Years later, when Cassandra was an established matriarch of Copper Creek, and her children were grown with children of their own, people would sometimes ask her about those early days, about what it was like to be accused of crimes she didn't commit, to be hunted across territories by a corrupt and powerful man. The hardest part, she would tell them, wasn't the fear or the running or even the false accusations. The hardest part was believing I deserved better, believing that truth would eventually win over lies, that good people would stand up for what's right when it mattered most. She would pause, then looking out at the town that had become her home, the community that had learned to see past accusations to character. But I was right to believe it. Truth is stronger than lies, love is stronger than hate, and courage, real courage, is contagious. When one person stands up for what's right, others follow. That's how justice wins in the end. And in Copper Creek, Montana, where a seamstress had once been called a criminal and ended up exposing the real criminals, that lesson was remembered and passed down through generations. The truth they learned was indeed worth fighting for. Thank you for joining Cassandra on her journey from accused fugitive to respected community leader. Her story reminds us that our past doesn't have to define our future, and that sometimes the greatest strength comes from the darkest moments. If you enjoyed this tale of courage, redemption, and the power of truth, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Until next time, remember that justice may be delayed, but it's never truly denied to those brave enough to fight for it.